The water tower stood alone in the middle of the grass plain where a town had been and was not anymore, and she saw it a long way off, a tall, dark cylinder up on its spidery legs against a sky going the color of a peach at the end of the day. The only vertical thing in a world gone flat and wide and empty to every horizon. There had been a town here once. She could read the ghost of it in the grass as she came near, the low green ridges where foundations lay buried, the straighter line of a filled cellar, the double furrow of the grade where the rails had run before someone pulled them up and sold them and let the prairie take the bed. But the tower had been too much trouble to pull down, or too little profit, and so it had been left, the way the biggest and the least useful things are always the ones that outlast everything around them, and it stood over the vanished town like a headstone too large for the grave, and she walked toward it across the grass with the wind at her back and the light dying, and no other place to be. She was 22 years old, and she carried the whole of what she owned on her back. 30 pounds of it, pared over the years to the few things that earned their place, a change of clothes rolled tight, a folding knife worn smooth at the spine, matches sealed in a plastic bread bag, a tin cup, a stub of candle, a small soft-covered notebook with a pencil in its spine, and a little under $9 folded in the back of it that she had not needed to spend in some days. She wanted little enough from the world that she could carry all of it, and still walk from one edge of a dead prairie town to the other to stand under the one thing left standing. And that was what she did, and she stood at the foot of the tower in the last of the light, and tipped her head back and looked up the long rusted length of it, and understood that someone was living up there, or had. It was the ladder that told her. The tower was a great riveted tank of iron, round, big as a house, held up 30 feet in the air on 4 splayed legs of latticed steel braced with rods, and up one leg ran a ladder to a catwalk that circled the tank. And the ladder was old, and rust-scaled the way the whole tower was rust-scaled, except for the rungs. The rungs were worn. Not worn to bright bare metal the way the hoist levers had been in the mine, but worn even so, the rust rubbed thin and dark and smooth on the tops of them, rung after rung all the way up, by the hands and the boots of someone who had climbed them not once or twice, but a great many times, up and down, for long enough to polish 30 feet of iron ladder with nothing but passage. A tower that no train had watered in 50 years does not have a worn ladder. A worn ladder means a climber, and a climber who climbs a dead water tower again and again means a person who has made the top of it a place they go. And she stood with her hand on the lowest worn rung and looked up into the gathering dark under the tank and knew she was going to climb it, because she had never yet stood at the foot of a question like this one and walked away. She climbed in the last of the light. The ladder ran up the inside of one leg, and the wind pushed at her the whole way. A steady prairie wind that never quite stopped, and leaned on her pack and hummed in the lattice of the tower. And she climbed the way she climbed everything, close to the iron, 3 points of contact, her weight low, not looking down at the grass falling away beneath her boots, but up at the dark underbelly of the tank swelling closer overhead. The rungs were cold, and the wind wanted her, and she gave it nothing, moving one hand, and then one boot, and then the next, steady, unhurried, the way she had learned that height is survived, not by speed and not by courage, but by refusing to hurry and refusing to look. And she felt under her palms the smooth, worn tops of the rungs, where a stranger's hands had gripped them 10,000 times before hers, and it was a strange companionship, climbing up the polished evidence of someone else's climbing, her hands finding the wear their hands had made, and it steadied her more than anything. The plain proof in the iron that a person had done this again and again, and lived to wear the ladder smooth. At the top, the ladder passed through a gap in the catwalk, and she came out onto the narrow iron walk that circled the tank 30 feet above the prairie, and the wind took her full there, and she gripped the rail and stood a moment, letting it have her. And the whole plain lay out below in the last peach light, the ghost town in the grass, the double furrow of the vanished grade running straight to both horizons, the enormous emptiness of it, and she understood why a person would climb to this even after the trains were gone. It was the highest place in 100 miles. It was the only place you could see the whole of the world you were alone in. And set into the side of the great iron tank where the catwalk ran past it, there was a door. It was cut into the curved wall of the tank itself, a low doorway with its edges sealed and framed, fitted with a proper door of planks on iron hinges, and the hinges were greased, and the latch was worn bright in the middle of all that rust by a hand that had worked it. And she stood on the swaying catwalk in the wind and looked at that bright latch and felt the old cold arithmetic run through her and arrive where it always arrived, which was that only the going in would tell her which of the answers was true. She lifted the latch. The door swung inward, greased and silent, and out of the round, dark belly of the tank came a still warm air that the wind could not reach, smelling of tallow and old wood and cold ash and dry paper, and she stooped and stepped in off the windy catwalk into a sudden enormous quiet, and she was inside the tank, and she was not the first. She stood just inside the door and let her eyes come to it. The tank was a great iron drum laid on its side, round overhead and round underfoot, and someone had built a life inside the curve of it. A floor of planks had been laid across the bottom of the round to make it level, and on the floor stood the furnishings of a small, tight home, a bed against the curved wall with its mattress and blankets, a little sheet-iron stove with its pipe rising to a fitting let into the top of the tank, a table and a stool, shelves pegged to a frame that stood free inside the drum since nothing could be. Fixed to the curve, a lantern hung from a hook welded to the tank's own iron. There was a rightness to the way it all sat in the round that she felt before she could name it, and when she looked for the name of it she found it in the curve itself. A round room has no corner to be cold in, no far dark end. The warmth of the little stove ran round the walls and came back on itself and held. And the builder had known that, had set the bed where the curve would cup the heat toward it, had made a virtue of the strange shape the way a good hand makes a virtue of whatever it is given. The round walls threw her small sounds back at her softly. High in the curve overhead a few rivet holes and a seam let in the last gray pins of daylight, and through one of them the wind made a low, sweet, endless note, a tone the whole tank sang in the blow, and she would come to know that note as the voice of the place, the sound of the wind playing the tank like a great iron flute, and to sleep by it, and to miss it on the still nights when it was gone. But that first evening she only stood in the round quiet, and turned once slowly, taking it in, and let herself feel for the space of that turn the thing she rarely let herself feel, which was that she had found something. And then she put the feeling down and picked up the work, because that was what she did with the feeling, and the work that first evening was to understand where she was before the dark was total. She lit the lantern. It was trimmed and the oil good, and it caught and threw a warm brown light up the curved iron walls, and the tank came around her golden and strange, a home in the belly of a drum, and she saw it whole. And on the plank table, weighted under a smooth prairie stone, there was a book. Because there was always a book, she had come to expect it now, the way you come to expect a certain kindness from a certain kind of person, and she was learning that the people who built these hidden places were all a certain kind of person, and that the book was the thing they left because it was the one part of themselves they could leave. But the book she left for the morning. That first night she was tired from the miles and the climb, and the wind was rising, and she wanted to know the place in the dark before she trusted it with her sleep, and so she went over it by lantern light, the stove and its pipe, the water, the ways in and out. The water was the cleverness of it, and she worked it out slowly and admired it. The tank had a home in its upper half, on the raised plank floor, but its lower half, below the floor, still held water, the last of the creek water the tower had been built to hold, kept sweet and cold and dark under the boards, and a trap in the floor with a bucket on a cord let a person draw it up without ever going out into the weather. The builder drank the tower's own water from inside the tower, from the great cold cistern under the floor, and she lifted the trap and let the bucket down into the black, and drew it up, and the water was sweet and cold, and tasted of iron and rain, and she drank, and it was good. She found the drain, too, a valve and a wheel at the low point of the floor that would let the underfloor water out through the old delivery pipe and down to the prairie if ever a person wanted the tank empty. And she noted it and its wheel, and did not think much of it. Then, and closed the trap, and went to her bed as the wind came up in the dark outside and played its low sweet note in the seams of the tank, and she slept. She woke in the deep of the night because the tower was swaying and the whole iron drum had begun to groan. The wind had not stopped rising while she slept. It had become a storm, a true prairie blow, the kind that comes across 1,000 flat miles with nothing to break it, and falls on the one tall thing in all that plain with the whole weight of its running, and the tower was that one tall thing, and it was taking the storm the way it had taken every storm for 100 years, by swaying. She felt it in the dark, the slow, sickening lean and return, the tank riding 30 feet up on its 4 splayed legs and giving to the wind and coming back, giving and coming back, and the iron of it groaned and sang, and the low sweet note had become a moan, and she lay in the swaying dark with her heart going, and made herself think instead of run, because the animal in her wanted to be down that ladder and flat on the solid ground, and the animal would put her off the tower into 100-mile-an-hour wind in the pitch dark and kill her, and she was not going to let it. The tower had stood 100 years of this. The swaying was the tower doing what it was built to do, bending where a stiff thing would break, and she made herself feel the return at the end of every lean, the tower coming back, and she made herself trust the return, which was the only thing there was to trust. And then, under the groan of the iron and the scream of the wind, she heard a new sound, a sound from below the floor, a knocking and then a rushing, and she understood it a beat too late. And by the time she had the lantern lit and the trap up the water under the floor was higher than it had been, and rising. She knelt at the open trap with the lantern and looked down into the black and saw it, the cold dark water climbing the inside of the tank toward the floorboards, and she heard the rushing that fed it and traced it in her mind to the thing she had seen coming in and not understood. A wind pump, a great steel wheel on a derrick out at the edge of the grass, by a creek she had not known was there. A pump built to fill the tower from the creek whenever the wind turned the wheel, and it had stood idle in the calm, and now the storm had it. Now the storm was spinning that wheel like a top and driving creek water up the old pipe and into the tank faster than she could think, filling the tank she was living in, and the water was rising toward her floor. And if it reached the floor, it would rise through the trap and over the boards and fill the home and the drum and her in it. She knelt there 1/2 second longer than she should have, and then the ledger she had not read came into her mind, the book under its stone on the table, and even as she lunged for it she was cursing herself for a fool, for going to sleep in a stranger's house without reading the one thing the stranger had left to be read, and she got the book and threw it open on the plank floor in the swaying lantern light, and turned the pages fast, looking for the thing she needed. And she found it, because it was where such things were always left, set apart in the middle of a page with a ruled line above and below, and it said when the big wind comes the wheel will pump, open the drain or the tank will fill, the wheel is the key. She had the drain. She had seen the drain, the valve and the wheel at the low point of the floor, and she went to it and got both hands on the wheel and threw her weight against it, and it was stiff. It was 50 years stiff, and the water was at the underside of the boards now. She could hear it. She could feel the cold of it coming up through the floor into her knees, and she set her boots and hauled on the wheel with everything she had, and it gave. A groan, and then a turn, and then a run. And below the floor the drain opened, and the tower began to let its water go, down the old delivery pipe, and out and down 30 feet to the prairie grass. And she knelt with her hands on the wheel and her head down and listened, and the rushing in of the pump and the rushing out of the drain fought each other under the floor in the dark. And slowly, the rushing out won, and the water under the boards stopped rising, and held, and began to fall. She did not let go of the wheel even then. She crouched over it in the swaying, groaning dark with the lantern throwing her huge shadow round the curved iron walls, and she watched the water fall away from the boards by the light let down through the trap, an inch and then another, and only when she was sure, when the cold had left her knees and the sound below had changed from a fight to a steady draining run, did she sit back on her heels and let the shaking come, the whole delayed animal terror of it moving through her at last now that the danger was past, the way it always came late in her, after, when it was safe to feel it, never in the moment when feeling it would cost her the thing she needed to do. She stayed at the wheel a long time. The storm walked over the prairie all the rest of that night, and the tower swayed and groaned, and the wheel out on the grass spun and pumped, and she kept the drain open and let it pump the creek straight through the tank and out the bottom, in one side and out the other, the tower a thing the storm poured water through and could not fill. And toward dawn the wind fell off, and the wheel slowed and stopped, and the pumping stopped, and she closed the drain most of the way and left it cracked, the way she understood now it was always meant to be left, and she sat on the stool in the gray first light, with the ledger open on her knees and her hands still shaking a little, and she read the whole of it, start to finish, the way she should have read it the night before she ever slept a wink in a stranger's tower, over a stranger's water in the path of a stranger's wind. He had been a drifter. That was the thing that came up out of the pages and stopped her. That was the thing she had not found in any of the other books, in the mine or the bridge or the tunnel. The others had been railroad people, tenders and keepers and engineers, people the line had made and then abandoned, but this one had been like her. He said so on the first page, in a hand that was not schooled and not sure but plain and honest. I come up the grade with nothing, and I climbed the tower to see how far the empty went, and I never found the far side of it, so I stayed. He had been young, she thought, younger even than she was, when he climbed the worn by no one ladder for the first time and stood on the catwalk and saw the whole of the emptiness and decided to live in the middle of it, and he had built the home in the tank with his own hands over years, laid the floor and set the stove and rigged the trap and the bucket, and worked out the wind pump and the drain the hard way, she thought, the same hard way she had just worked it out, in a storm in the dark with the water rising, except that he had had no book to lunge for, no stranger's rule set apart on a page, and he had lived to write the rule down only because he had been luckier or quicker than a person had any right to be. And he had set it apart with a line, above and below, so that whoever came after him would not have to be as lucky. There was a thing in that which she sat with a long while in the gray dawn. Every one of them had done this, she saw now. Every builder of every hidden place she had found had learned the one deadly thing about their chosen home by nearly dying of it, and had written that one thing down, plainly, set apart, so that the next soul in would be spared the nearly dying. They could leave nothing else. They could not leave their names or their faces or their company. They were gone. All of them, long gone into the ground. But they could leave the one hard-bought rule that was the difference between the place keeping you and the place killing you, and they had each of them bent their last strength to leaving it, for a stranger they would never meet, out of nothing but the plain wish that the thing they had learned should not have to be learned again from the start by every person who came after. It was, she thought, the truest kindness she knew of, and the loneliest, and she had lived on the far end of it 4 times now, and she meant to earn it. He had left her the rule he had nearly died to learn. She had nearly died anyway, for not reading it in time. But she had read it in time, in the end, and that was the whole of what the book was for, and she understood now why they all left one. The rest of the ledger was a drifter's life lived in one place, which he seemed to feel the strangeness of as much as she did. He wrote about the wind and the note it played in the tank and how he had come to tell the weather by the pitch of it. He wrote about the water and the pump and the creek. He wrote about the long light on the grass at evening and the way the vanished town showed itself in the green after a rain, the ghost of the streets coming up in the grass and fading again. and how he would climb to the catwalk and look down on the town that was not there, and feel less alone in the middle of the empty than he ever had in the middle of a crowd. And the entries thinned, the way they always thinned, the years widening, until the last, undated, at the head of a page, the note in the tank is the wind telling you what it means to do. Learn it, and you will never be caught. And under that, smaller, leave the drain cracked. Keep the ladder. The empty is better with something in it. Then the hand stopped, and the rest was blank, and the drifter who had come up the grade with nothing and stayed had gone out of the book the way he had gone out of the world, leaving a home in a tank and a rule that saved a life and a ladder worn smooth for the next one up. She closed the book. She sat with it on her knees in the gray dawn with the storm gone off east, and the prairie washed and shining out through the open door, and she felt a kinship she had not felt with any of the others, because the others had been keepers of things the world had built, and this one had been what she was, a person who came up out of the empty with nothing and looked for the far side of it and did not find it, and made a home in the middle instead. She set the ledger back on the table under its stone, because it belonged there and was not hers to carry off, and she took up her own notebook and turned to a fresh page and wrote the first line of her account. And it was not about the stove or the bed or the water. It was this: leave the drain cracked. The wheel is the key. She underlined it twice. Then she went on. The days took on a shape. She stopped counting them. She woke in the round golden quiet of the tank to the low sweet note of the wind in the seams, and drew her water up through the trap from the cold cistern under the floor, and lit the little stove and went to whatever the day asked, and a home in a 100-year-old iron tank on a windy plain asks a good deal. She learned the wind above all, the way the drifter had learned it. The pitch of the note in the tank that meant a calm coming, and the pitch that meant a blow, and she came to know a storm half a day before it arrived by the voice of her own house, and she never again left the drain shut, and she never again was caught. She went out to the wind pump on a still day, and climbed the derrick, and greased the wheel, and freed its stiff vane so that it would turn true, and not tear itself apart in the next big wind. Because a pump that pumps is only a danger if you fight it, and a pump kept right is a thing that fills your tower for free whenever the wind blows, if you leave the drain cracked and let it run through. And she made her peace with the wheel the way the drifter had, by understanding it. She stood a while at the top of the derrick when the greasing was done, and looked back at the tower from the outside, the tall rusted drum on its splayed legs, with the little stovepipe rising from its crown and a thread of her own smoke going off flat on the wind. And she thought that no one passing on the far horizon would ever guess a life burned inside that dead iron tank, and the secrecy of it pleased her the way it must have pleased him, the being unseen, the having a warm, hidden place in the middle of all that open, where the whole world could look right at your house and see only rust. She patched the seams that let the rain in, climbing the curve inside on a plank she rigged, working tar into the weep of each old rivet. She oiled the ladder against the rust so its worn rungs would carry her another 50 years. She swept the plank floor for the claiming of it, and aired the blankets over the catwalk rail in the sun, and set the shelves in the order her own hand liked, and left untouched the few small things that had been his. Out of the courtesy she paid all of them. She climbed to the catwalk every evening. That became the shape of her days, the thing she pointed them at, the way the drifter must have pointed his, to climb the worn ladder at the end of the day and stand on the iron walk 30 feet above the grass in the enormous prairie light and watch the sun go down the whole width of the world, the ghost town greening below her after a rain, the double furrow of the vanished grade running straight to both horizons, the wind coming across the 1,000 flat miles to play its note in the tank at her back. She watched the weather build and pass on those evenings, the great anvil storms walking the far edge of the plain with their curtains of rain hanging down and their lightning going silent and pink inside them at that distance. And she was not afraid of them now, because she knew the note her house would sing when one turned toward her, and she knew the drain was cracked and the wheel was free, and a storm that had nearly killed her the first night had become a thing she could stand on her own high iron walk and watch come, and name, and be ready for. She was not lonely up there. She had thought she would be. She had been lonely in towns, in crowds, in the passing faces that did not know her and did not want to. But up on the tower over the empty she was not lonely. She was alone, which was a different thing and a better one, the thing she had been looking for down every rail line she had ever walked, without knowing that was what she was looking for. And she had found it in the middle of a dead prairie in the belly of an iron tank, left to her by a stranger who had found the same thing in the same place a lifetime before, and kept it warm for her without ever knowing her name. On an evening in the deepening of the year, she sat inside the tank by the ticking stove with the lantern lit and the drifter's ledger closed under its stone and her own notebook open on her knee, and the wind played its low sweet note in the seams of her house, telling her, she knew now, that the night would be calm. She was 22 years old. She had a folding knife, a box of matches, a tin cup, and a little under $9 she had not spent, and now had nowhere to spend, and did not miss. She had a home in the belly of an iron drum 30 feet above a vanished town, a cistern of sweet cold water under her floor, a wind that filled it for free and sang her the weather, a ladder worn smooth by a stranger's passage, and now by hers, and a book she had not written full of a life that had been, of all the lives, the most like her own. She turned to a fresh page and smoothed it flat with the side of her hand, and the tower swayed its slow small sway in the evening wind the way it had swayed for 100 years, and would sway for 100 more, and she began to write. In the plain honest hand of a person who has come up out of the empty and stopped looking for the far side of it, the first line of the keeping of the only home she had ever made her own.